actually done all of the technical side on a webinar. So I'm hoping very much that things go according to plan. So anybody in the chat, if you can't hear us, see us, or the sound is a little bit iffy, please do let us know. I'm Susie Ancret and co-director and founder of Plum Personnel, which is an independent recruitment consultancy started in 2001. I can't believe that next month we're going to be celebrating our 20th anniversary. We work in Solihull and surrounding areas, and our role is to work in partnership with clients across the local area for recruitment and talent solutions. We work with professionals to source professionals. We take great pride in what we do, and we have a recruitment charter with the first principle around diversity and inclusion. It's absolutely at the core of what we do and our purpose in enabling people to have opportunities in the future. We know jobs transform lives, and we're privileged to be part of that journey. We also realise that talent isn't just about skills, it's also about behaviours, attitude, aptitude. And so, as the first recruitment consultancy to achieve diversity assured accreditation way back in 2007, it's been our underpinning foundation to move the agenda forward in this particular area. We know only too well that in the recruitment cycle, unconscious bias can get in the way. So without further ado, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our panelists here. And we have, I'm going to just share the screen. We have Joel Blake, who is the founder of GFA Exchange, which is a fintech organisation. Baljit Kaur, who is a consultant for equality and diversity and inclusion training, and Emily Williams, who's Customer Success Manager at Thomas International. So I'm going to start off with Emily. Would you like to just introduce yourself and your purpose for being here today?
Yeah, thanks, Susie. So as Susie mentioned, my name is Emily Williams. I'm a Customer Success Manager at Thomas International. We're a team of applied psychologists and product experts who support our customers to really maximise the value that they get from the services that we provide. So today I'm here to talk to you all about psychometrics and how they can minimise unconscious bias. So talking about best practice implementation and things like that.
Thank you very much indeed, Emily. And through to Baljit, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Baljit Kaur. I am a diversity and inclusion specialist, as Susie mentioned. I'm also the managing director of Innate Consultancy. Innate Consultancy in that we all have an innate need to feel valued, respected and included. So we deal with the gamut of diversity and inclusion issues around attraction, engagement and retention. And as Susie mentioned, I'm also a board member with Women in Banking and Finance, and I sit on the steering group for ACAS and Engage for Success, which is an employee engagement forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Baljit. And over to Joel. I've got to ask you to unmute.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Pleasure to be here. My name is Joel Blake, so founder of a fintech company called the GFA Exchange. We use data to make access to finance more inclusive and to evidence more inclusive business support for organizations. Also president of the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce, where we're really looking to see how we can help more businesses get inclusive access to international growth opportunities right across the Commonwealth, and indeed Commonwealth businesses to get more opportunities here back in the UK. It's fantastic to be here this morning. Look forward to sharing with you all.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm just going on to the next. Oops, sorry about that. Our aims for today, we're going to be setting the scene, because we all know that understanding unconscious bias, having a shared agreement and how it works for us and against us is really important. We're going to be looking at unlocking potential, and very importantly, we're going to explore the business case, the examples of the impact and why it's important to address unconscious bias in the diversity and inclusion agenda. So best get cracking. Get the ball rolling. I'm going to ask members of the panel, what actually is unconscious bias? How would you define it? Joel, can you kick this one off? Oh, unmute.
Technology, who would ever have it?
I know, and that wasn't me.
I think unconscious bias is many different kind of, it's determined in many different ways to different people, but the way I tend to look at it, it's about learned stereotypes and perceptions that are embedded within kind of unintentional or universal action, or simply put, doing what you don't know you're doing at any given moment in time. So it's about the way in which you interact with other people. It's the way in which you receive how you've been interacted with, and it's the interpretations and the actions that come off that a lot of the time. But I know as we go through the debate, we can talk about how that permeates in different ways, but that's how I tend to understand it from my perspective.
Baljit, what's your take on this?
Yeah, so I'll echo what Joel has said. It is absolutely those attitudes and those stereotypes that we all hold. None of us, escape the effect of stereotyping, and the pervasive and prevalent nature of bias is that it will affect our views, and it will affect our actions, and it will affect our decision making. And I think, Susie, it's very crucial to say that when we talk about bias, it's not just about unconscious bias. There are conscious biases that we are all aware that we hold. So it's, addressing them in that holistic way.
Absolutely. I'd just like to add there that I think the starting point is we are all biased. It's just at different levels, etc. And the name of your consultancy, Innate, is it nurtured? Is it something that we don't even learn? It's something that we're born with. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's interesting. Emily, what's your take on what unconscious bias is? How would you define it, or why does it matter?
I would, again, completely echo everything that Baljit and Joel have said, that it is something that we are not aware of, we're not able to control, but it's something that is within all of us, that has been influenced by many different things that have occurred throughout our lifetime, including, societal norms and things that impact the way in which we perceive different situations and different people, and the decisions that we make, the way we interact with people. It comes into everything that we do in every day when we are interacting with others, and like Baljit says, there is not just unconscious bias, but there is conscious bias, and actually we need to make sure that we are all aware of those biases and take steps to be able to minimize those.
And do you think the last 12 months has helped or hindered moving the dial forward for understanding unconscious bias and taking action? Joel, I'll come to you on that one.
I think it's a really interesting question, actually, Susie, and I'm sure the rest of the panel will have their views as well in that. I mean, from a race perspective, we all know about the Black Lives Matter movement and the impact that had on a global scale. But I think what that did is really catalyze during this COVID period the importance of EDI for all groups. I think there was definitely a focus on race because of that. And it uncovered many things that some may have known, some may not have known, but it certainly sparked a greater debate about the importance of race. But what it did do is open up the door for all aspects of EDI to be discussed as well. And it meant that those who had a voice, whether it was for or against diversity in the way that they would look at it from their perspective, it enabled people to have a much more richer and open dialogue. I think it was for the first time in the many, many years I've seen that in this COVID period, the level of conversation has been heightened, and there's been more conversation than ever before But the also slightly cynical side of me says, is that because it was the thing to be discussing?
Yeah.
And what happens a year from now, 5 years from now? Will we be having the same conversation? Because the conversation that we'd had this year are not new conversations either. And so for me, it's about the execution of actions that come out of those dialogues. I think that's what's really important. But I think the fact that this period has enabled more people to have conversation, and obviously, you know, using mediums like technology and Zoom and what have you, you can have that conversation at a wider scale as well, with more people, which then enriches that conversation even more. So that's been a real benefit. But it's what comes out of those conversations for the long term. I think that's the key thing.
Thank you. Balgis, I'm going to ask you, what do you feel that it over the past 12 months helped or hindered?
So I think certainly, as Joel has put it, the whole you know, effect of Black Lives Matters and the incidents that have occurred have really brought to our fore this issue around race, which has previously been neglected and almost abandoned, I would say, in many cases. So that's been a good thing. We have focused on that. The only thing I would say is, whilst we've had a much greater level of conversation that has happened, we almost need to shift the dial a little bit further, and we need to think about the quality of the conversations that we're having. So yes, definitely continue to have more conversations, but we need to up the ante in terms of the quality of conversations that we have, because I'm still seeing sort of many organizations in the space of having good intent, but possibly being a little bit awkward and clumsy about the conversations. And if we really want to gain traction, then we just need to ensure that we're in that space of having those well facilitated quality conversations about this really important topic. And I also think, just on race, we need to kind of think about some of the backlash that I think is emerging at this moment in time, I would say since the beginning of the year. So we've seen, for example, the Sainsbury's advert, you know, back end of last year. And there are a number of other examples where we are seeing sort of that empathy deficit arising again. You know, people are almost either getting some fatigue around this issue, or they feel it's a bit of a blame culture that's emerging within this topic. So, you know, it's just negating the effect of any backlash, and also building that within the conversations that we're having. Let's acknowledge that there is a bit of a backlash, and we need to kind of tackle it and nip it in the bud before it kind of, you know, morphs. And I just think on the other issue, in terms of COVID-19 and the impact that that's had, there's been a positive effect of that, as we all know, you know, attitudes in terms of employers and organizations, whereas previously they may have put barriers up as to working from home, working at home, whereas now some of those preconceived barriers have been dismantled. And for me, the biggest change, and hopefully this is what we'll take forward, is not just thinking about our policies and procedures in terms of how we need to adapt those to allow people to work from home and allow people to do things differently. But it's almost, for me, the monumental shift has to be not about those initiatives and policies, but more about the mindset. For me, this is not just about moving into the agile space in terms of having more agile policies and procedures, but developing those agile mindsets. You know, really thinking about, you know, how we do things in the future in terms of this global and interconnected world. You know, the opportunity is ours to be had, and that's all about mindset. For me, 95% of our actions are driven by our mindset. So how do we nurture that agile mindset? And I don't think we're having enough conversations as to, you know, what that means and how we nurture that. And previously,
really
we've sort of oriented our policies. Yeah, previously we've oriented our policies and procedures, people around our policies and procedures. And we really need that sort of shift, really. You know, we need to orient our policies and procedures around our people now, and not the other way around.
Emily, I'm going to bring you in here because you're working with Thomas and psychometrics and behaviours. How do you think that psychometrics can help with unconscious bias? Can that help move the dial forward?
So there's certainly been a heightened level of discussion around unconscious bias and diversity and inclusion generally in the past 12 months. We can see that there's definitely a discussion in lots of businesses on how they start to incorporate more policies and procedures into their businesses to really support the movement towards a more diverse and inclusive business model. And whilst we can't completely remove unconscious bias because it is so deeply embedded within all of us, we can take some steps to minimise that within our recruitment practices and development practices. And psychometrics can help to support to do this because they are an objective measure. So the assessments themselves contain no biases, or at least shouldn't do. And if they have rigorous scientific testing, you can be assured that there is that they will be able to minimize that bias, because they will be both reliable and valid. So you know that that bias will not be within that measure. It is an objective measure rather than subjective. So because a psychometric doesn't know an individual's background, it doesn't know their previous experience, their education, their gender, their ethnicity, their socioeconomic circumstances, all it is looking to measure is the degree to which somebody fits within a role, or the likelihood that they will succeed in a role, based on a number of different things, including the behaviours they display, their personality traits, their emotional intelligence level, the speed at which they learn new information. So the way in which psychometrics can help minimise that bias is because they are an objective measure. They allow hiring managers to make an informed decision about candidates based on objectivity rather than subjectivity. So when they are including those measures in their practices, it's allowing them to combine the information they've got with something that is objective, to allow them to make sure that those biases are not there right from the beginning, as soon as they start to recruit people.
And it's interesting, Baljeet mentioned about the mindset, because sometimes when you see the results of a test, it's about being open and accepting what the test is telling you, rather than what your thoughts may be saying about a person. I know that can come into it as well. So I think we're all agreed that diversity, unconscious bias, conscious bias, all of these things matter in today's world. But what you're also saying is that it matters more in tomorrow's world, making things happen. Would anybody like to add anything to that part of making things happen and why it's important? Go on, Joel.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, Susie, because Baljeet made a really great point there about the mindset. Because in our business and in our kind of area of D&I, it's about the entrepreneurial mindset. We encourage our clients to think about the entrepreneurial culture that they're needing to create in order to drive the innovation to be sustainable for the long term. And therefore, D&I and the part that plays in generating that entrepreneurial culture. Because everyone has different skills that you can bring into an organization, but it's about how those skills are working together and how the environment has been created where people feel they can be their best self based on their own individual contribution, and understanding how that feeds the overarching delivery of the services of the businesses to achieve the objectives for all. And when I say for all, I don't mean just the organization, but for each individual staff member who's contributing to that end goal. And so the mindset is absolutely crucial for that, 100%. And more to the point, actually, once people acknowledge they've got the entrepreneurial mindset, it's been given the opportunity to fail regularly.
Yes.
Because iteration from the failure is what's going to enable that mindset to really add value. It's not just because you've got a great idea because you're thinking differently or because you're thinking diversely. It's because you've thought about things, done things, it hasn't worked, yet you can still take the learning and utilize that diverse mindset and that entrepreneurial mindset to bring out better solutions based on that learning. But you need the right culture where people feel they can do that.
Absolutely. It's an ecosystem, isn't it? And everything relies on each other. And I absolutely get where about making mistakes is so important, because I do think that there can be some paralysis in you actually trying to move forward because you failed and it didn't work, or because you're getting resistance in moving things forward. I'd just like to say to the audience, if you've got any questions that you want to ask or any comments, please feel free to pop them in, because we're getting the merging of mindset, mental well-being in this conversation, which I think is fantastic, that's the important parts of it. So open question. We've got a question from Jade. Can you address the risks of the tests not fulfilling their objectives if those responsible for putting the test together are not from a diverse group to begin with? And I think it's a great question, Jade. Anybody like to take, well, actually, Emily, what would you like to say?
Yeah, of course. So I think that, as I mentioned, if a psychometric has gone through rigorous scientific testing, you can be assured that it is reliable and valid, and therefore it shouldn't have any biases. We've actually done some research into this in Thomas on our own assessments, and we found that across all of our assessments, we don't have any bias in our assessments towards things like gender, ethnicity, education level. So we know that when individuals are completing, you wouldn't expect anybody to score outside of the particular sort of normal range that we would expect people to fit based on anything other than the way that they are scoring in their own, personality type, behavioural style, etc. But it's a really interesting question, and I think that there are certainly probably some psychometric measures that aren't as rigorously tested that may well have that difference in the measurement, that actually you can't be assured necessarily that they have that ability to remove that bias. And I think it's really important, I think not just with psychometrics specifically, but generally when we're thinking about sort of creating new policies or ways in which we might minimize this bias, to make sure that the groups that are doing those things are diverse themselves, because I think the question is absolutely right that, the policies and procedures, and whether that's psychometrics or otherwise, shouldn't be defined by individuals who are not from a diverse background, in my opinion. But it'd be interesting to get John Baljett's thoughts on that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. And I think that's sort of the level of detail that organisations need to seek before they actually implement a test, because there are thousands of tests out there, and we really do need to understand, what is their purpose, what is their validity, what is their predictability outcome, etc., before we decide to select a test. And this whole issue around, are they de-biased? So I think that's really important, because everybody sort of jumps to Myers-Briggs testing, and that seems to be sort of, out there and everybody's familiar with it. But Myers-Briggs themselves say that their tests are not suitable for hiring decisions and not suitable for pre-employment, processes. So it's really important to think through the issue about what the purpose of the test is. And I also think in terms of testing, I think the proof is in the pudding. If we're monitoring the outcomes, if our tests and our policies and procedures and our systems are always supporting the same outcome time and time again, then I think there is a good cause to actually say that those tests and those systems and policies and procedures are institutionally and systemically biased. The proof is in the results and the outcomes.
It's very interesting, Baljeet. We've got a question here from Julian asking, how should organisations go about ensuring they have a diverse and inclusive environment to encourage that sense of belonging, collaboration and growth mindset? What are the key steps to achieve that? Julian, I don't think we can answer that in a short space of time. That's a whole afternoon at least, or even longer. Baljeet, I'm going to come to you because you mentioned about mindset. Could you answer that question?
Okay, yes, as you say, it's going to be a very long answer, so I'm going to have to try and keep this very succinct. So in terms of, what can organizations do to enable that growth mindset? Again, we're talking about mindset. You can have all the diversity initiatives and, policies and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's about how people think. It's the way that people think. So that's going to be very much about, the awareness you do in the organization. How are you ensuring that every organization has that consistency of understanding in terms of what diversity and inclusion means and how it actually manifests in the organization? That's really important. So that's sort of the foundation. Has everybody got that consistent level of awareness and understanding, not just in terms of what it means, but also their responsibility within that environment? And then when you've done the awareness, it can't just be you've done a 3.5-hour training course, whatever that looks like, and therefore we're done. This is about how you then sustain that communication and that awareness raising throughout, throughout the year, basically, year and year again. because this is about building upon some of that shift in terms of attitudes and actions and behaviors that people are looking to make. And habits take, many years in order to be formulated. So how do we ensure that we're supporting people in terms of that sustained effort to shift people to where we want all our people to be?
And I think, I hope you would agree that we've had a compelling reason to change the way that we work. And I think that when people come back to work, their mindset for many of them will have changed. And business leaders and HR managers have to be ready to start addressing the way in which people are thinking differently. And this might hopefully be a real opportunity to implement the steps that are needed, as you say, Baljit, for the sustainability of this. It's not a training course that you jump on and you're going to come off having a different point of view. It's about every day you have to live and breathe what you're doing. Would anybody like to comment on what's been said so far?
I mean, I could add to that as well, Susie, in that I think absolutely the sustainability and the measures and the processes internally are key. I think from a raw business point of view, it's making sure that that diverse team, culture, and all that great work that you're doing on that aspect understands the drivers of growth for the business itself as well, and therefore understands where they can take all of that energy and all of that diverse approach towards growing the actual organization and knowing that they're playing a part in the success of the organization. And within that, those drivers of growth, there's kind of 5 general drivers of growth that we've seen with organizations, and they tend to be leadership. And so looking at the top line leadership, key decision makers, what's the diversity and the capability for them to be able to lead an inclusive and diverse organization for the future? Now, have you got that right level of diversity, right level of thinking at that strategic decision-making table within your organization? Because it doesn't matter what happens, senior management, middle management, what have you, if you haven't got that buy-in from the top. So that mindset bit that absolutely that both Baljit and Emily have talked about is that has to be embedded at the very top before anything can happen. But then that leads into then innovation of business models and systems, the workforce, how it actually works together, the customer value, and the commercial growth of the organization for the long term. Those are the 5 things overall: the leadership, innovation, workforce, customer, and commercial. But I think the fundamental piece in any business, and I'm looking at it purely from a business point of view, if you're not developing and creating and providing the value to your customer at the level that they expect, as well as exceeding their expectation as much as possible, then the level of diversity you want to include and engage and put into the heart of the business might be great for the people, but it won't be great for your business for the long term. And sometimes we don't talk about customer value and the commerciality of EDI. We often talk about the people, and they both have to work hand in hand when you're looking at it from a business point of view. And quite frankly, your people are often your biggest cost on your bottom line. So there has to be some kind of relationship and balance between the commercial outcome and the value you provide for your customer to generate that commercial outcome, and the care and support and the inclusive and diverse environment of your people. And if you don't see those 2 things hand in hand, you get that imbalance, and that's the challenge, I would say, for organizations on the back of COVID. It's both a challenge and an opportunity to look at how they can scale their business, readdress what customer value means based on what they've had to go through in COVID to survive, and then how does diversity and inclusion help them to recruit the right people, recruit the right type of customer as well, right type of suppliers, stakeholders, supporters, partners, etc., to drive forward a much more inclusive organization and indeed customer value.
Thank you, Joel. And I know many years ago when we first met, I felt that the whole thing about ED&I was made far more complex. And if you actually diluted it, it's about not customer service, about customer care. And that's your internal care and what you're doing outside. And that is the business case for it, or a good starting point to see that it has got benefits to the individual as well. I'm going to just stop here and bring in a poll, because I think that if you say to any organisation, are you diverse and inclusive, they're probably going to tell you yes, but it's not always the case. So poll here, and I'd like people to pop in their answers as to whether they can say their organisation has got a positive approach to unconscious bias, or whether or not the commitment post-COVID will improve or not. And we're getting lots of questions in as well. So I'm seeing all of those, and we'll make sure that we address them. So we've just got 30 seconds, 20 seconds for you to pop your answers in. We've got nobody voting. That means one per, oh, we're getting them now. Okie doke. 5 seconds. There are the results. Can the panel see those results there? Got them? Okay. Any comments on those? Emily, would you like to have a comment, be the first to comment on those?
Absolutely. It's really interesting, the results that have come through. I think there's definitely a sort of majority answer coming through for both questions. And I think that there seems to be both a commitment and a plan to sort of focus on unconscious bias and D&I in organisations across the board. I think what it would be interesting to see is whether or not, I think unconscious bias particularly is something that's often spoken about in the recruitment space, but it's not often talked about sort of later down the line when we're talking about that mindset and culture side of things. How can we ensure that whilst we are being conscious of unconscious bias in our recruitment practices, and we're ensuring that we are recruiting in a diverse way and making sure that the individuals that are joining the organisation are from a more diverse group rather than from one particular group, and that we are taking steps to minimise that, such as psychometrics, for example. How do we ensure that the culture of the organisation instills that D&I policy as well, not just, as Balgit said, creating the policies themselves, but actually, you know, behaviourally and culturally within the organisation, how will that fit? I think that's oftentimes something that, as I say, is more focused towards the sort of recruitment side of things. And how can we ensure that this is a continuous improvement process, that it's not just something that is designed now because it's something that everybody is interested in and recognises the importance of, and make sure that actually it's something that for the future generations is instilled very deeply within the way in which we work. So yeah, it's really interesting that at the moment there seems to be a high level of sort of positivity in the approach that people take towards unconscious bias, and also the commitment that organisations are taking. Be interesting to see, I think it was Joel said earlier, whether or not that is still the case in a number of years' time, whether we are still actively ensuring that we are changing our policies and processes and the way in which we work, the cultures that we are instilling within our organisations to ensure that it's still a high level of importance around unconscious bias, diversity and inclusion.
Thank you, Emily. And I think it's the 80-20 rule. If you have a look at those results, that there's positive steps being taken forward. There's good hope for the future. So that's a very good place to be. And I'm just going to go over to Linda, who's asked a question about, can the panel share any experiences or tips of how to reach those that don't own or engage or acknowledge their own unconscious bias? And she's making the point, in her experience, the ones in the room don't need the education. It's the ones that you haven't even got in the room and reaching out to them that do.
I mean, I can give a really quick example. I spent 3.5 years as the diversity lead for golf for the UK a few years back, and if you imagine me as a 6 foot tall black guy going into some of the deepest, darkest parts of England, particularly private member golf clubs, you know, golf at that time wasn't the most diverse sport in the world, and some would argue it still isn't. But I remember going into this golf club, and you know, I was going there to deliver some diversity training to the club captain and the golf board, and you walk in and it's the old panelled room and pictures across the walls of all the golf captains over the last 5, 6, 7, 10 captains, etc. And I remember walking in, and you know, you turn around and it's that movie scene where everyone looks at you and they're thinking, oh, interesting. By the end of that session that I delivered, I found out that, you know, the frosty reception that I felt walking in, it cooled and became warm, and I found out that, you know, someone had a villa in the Caribbean, and they've had that for 30 years. Someone was married to an Asian lady. There was people talking about how they'd grown up with people from different backgrounds. Some were talking about their kids. One gentleman in particular was talking about cerebral palsy with his child and how that opened his mind. And it made me think about the fact that, how did we get from a frosty reception to a warm environment? And when I look back now, it's because I was able to talk about what was important to them. And what was important to them as a golf club was being able, in its crudest sense, to justify membership for the future. Mm-hmm. Because they had an aging population that was dying, and although it was a private members club and it was quite wealthy as a club, at some point that's going to change because of the age profile of their members. And so diversity and inclusion was put into the context of their membership and future survival. But by doing that, it opened up the door to then discussing the moral, the social case for it and everything else. And so we were able to have a much more informed and richer conversation because we started from a place that was most important to them, rather than saying, well, you know, you need to start on the moral or social, and kind of hitting them with the hammer, so to speak, to begin with. Yeah. And that's something that helps me with further conversations with other golf clubs and into other sectors, because you have to see and meet people where they are. And I think it was Belgium earlier, she talked about getting the right questions up front, the quality of the dialogue, the quality of the information. You need all of that. And then you also then be able to understand where they're seeing all of that. Then you then think about, okay, first step. And as I say, by the end of that session, it was one of the best sessions I'd been involved in, because it helps me to also understand that as a diversity professional, when I go into environments that could be seen as being oppressive or could be seen as not being, you know, palatable to the subject, I might be the problem who might needs to check my unconscious bias too.
Yes, yes.
You know, because I'm walking into the room with my own sense of bias. So unconsciously, I'm coming in with my own mindset. And you have to be aware of, as a professional, what you're coming in with and how that can affect the impact that can or can't be created by the time you leave.
And it's
so
understanding the
really
pain. Sorry, Joel.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's about understanding the pain, but also acknowledging what your response is to that understanding of that pain and why your reaction is such, or indeed knowing that you've got that kind of equilibrium. Now you can start from a balanced place. So yeah, that was just a quick example of understanding the pain first, and then coming at it from that perspective.
Yeah. Baljit, would you like to add anything to that one? Because it's a really interesting one about getting people engaged, not the audience that are already on board with the right mindset.
So yeah, I think absolutely that whole sort of, business benefit, how does the business remain relevant and, future proofed beyond, each and every one of us really. Because diversity is a fact. We are in an increasingly diverse and, complex world. We also know that diversity is inevitable, in that organizations will have to pay attention to this, because we are dealing with a more socially aware and socially skilled population. So it's almost, we can't avoid this. It's inevitable. We have to take it seriously. But then what does it mean for our business? How does it produce the business benefits and keep us relevant and future proof? So absolutely, as Joel says, those discussions are imperative. But then I think there's those internal sort of, conversations in a supportive way, because it's Joel, your point about, if we hammer people with this, people will be angry or defensive, react in some of those negative ways. And really, we need to engage with people in a supportive way. So it's not sort of that, again, what I mentioned earlier, sort of blaming individuals. This is a white male problem, for example, or they are, more extremely culpable in that sense. That just alienates part of the very population that we need to engage in terms of being allies and helping us advance this agenda. It's where the power rests. So it's about how we deal with these issues and talk about these issues in that supportive way, as opposed to that restrictive way. It has to be done because the world requires us to. How do people actually understand what the personal benefits to them are, what's in it for me, as well as the organizational benefits? And that can only happen through those conversations. Those conversations, supportive conversations, where we're bringing people on board and people understand the benefits and the advantages to the organization and themselves individually.
I know that when we were doing the Diversity Assured accreditation, we had PwC, KPMG on board, because they recognised that unless they actually changed the way in which they attracted or tried to attract talent to a more diverse audience, they weren't going to be able to sustain their number one of the top three accountancy practices. And so that was their pain. They could see into the future. And I think that we have to look at it in the broader sense in terms of recruitment. We have to reach out to those people, that hidden talent pool, and bring them in. And it's not a race thing, it's not an ethnicity thing, it's also about ageism, people who are returning to work, all of those different areas that we have to look at in a different way. And somebody's asked the question about removing names from CVs, having blind CVs. Is that a good thing? And I can see, I don't know, from your point of view, I think it's a very easy thing to do, but actually, if you don't have the conversation first and they've got a bias, then when they walk in for the interview, it's all going to fall down. So it is something that has to have more than just quick interventions. It's got to be, going back to that word, Balja, it's got to be the mindset. Right, gosh, there's such a lot to get through here. So my next question, and I'm coming back to you, Joel, on this one, about following on from the poll. What part do you feel data may play in regards to diversity? Because we're a world of data now. We want to have the information there to help us make decisions. What role do you think data will be playing in the future?
Great question, Susie. I think data is going to be fundamental, and for my own personal opinion, one could argue I would say that for what we do. But it is, because what data gives you is an evidence base to spark those types of conversations. It gives you the ability to use an evidence-based approach as dialogue tools in a range of different conversations. But I think more important than the data in itself is understanding the source of that data. And that's where, going back to, I think, what Emmy was saying earlier about making sure that the validity of the people who are putting together the questions, which gives you access to data, which gives you access to intelligence, which is then utilized. That combination is really, really important. But I think as we think into the future, there's something what I want to say I've coined it, but I've called the triple D effect, which is data, diversity, and digital. I think the future of the workforce and the future of business is the combination of those three things. It's in all that we've said around mindset and make sure you got the right questions, etc. It's getting the right data through that combination of those things. It's making sure then you've got the level of diversity necessary to view that data in multiple ways. So you're reducing that groupthink and you're creating the most widest range of innovative solutions in relation to whatever you're talking about, whether it's about customers or talent growth or what have you. But then it's using digital technologies to accelerate the pace of that change, whether it's in the way in which you deliver those solutions or the way in which you interact with a wider, diverse ecosystem to get even more solutions to build upon, etc. So it's data, the diversity of the intelligence generated, and then the use of digital technologies to enact those solutions. That's where I feel that triple D effect is quite important, because that could be relevant for any organization, in any space, in any sector. And I just think the way that the volume of data and the volume of digital technologies is now in the market, people are going to become even more important with those things. And so that piece in the middle of the diversity aspect and the diverse intelligence, that's what will bring those two elements of data and digital together to create that innovative change for the future.
Thank you, Joel. And I'm going to ask you, Emily, because your organisation will be doing a lot of research. What has Thomas done to show that they can help minimise unconscious bias?
Yeah, so we have an in-house science team who are a mix of business psychologists and statisticians who regularly research our assessments. And one of the areas they do research extensively is to minimise bias. So like I mentioned earlier, we found that there are no differences in our assessments in areas such as education, ethnicity and gender and things like that. So we know that regardless of the individual completing, their scores won't be influenced by any of those areas. And we're very proud to have 3 of our assessments registered with the British Psychological Society to confirm that that is the case. We also have a case study with Harvey Nash, which investigated gender differences in behavioural scores. And it was found that there was no differences between males and females. So gender did not cause individuals to score in a particular way. So that's quite an interesting study that we've done. So we do know that our assessments, as I mentioned earlier, are both reliable and valid. And this is one of the areas that's really critical to ensuring that a psychometric is an objective measure and does support the reduction of unconscious bias.
Thank you, Emily. And may I ask, is that information, that data available? Because I know very often HR professionals will say to me, can you give me the proof of this? Can you give me something that I can use to go to the board to help them understand? And the facts and figures speak very loud, often more loudly than the emotions.
Yes, absolutely. So we do have quite a lot of published research on this, including a video case study that we've done with Harvey Nash that is on our website if anyone's interested and wants to have a look at that. We have a number of studies that have looked at different topics. We have one we did sort of 18 months ago, I think it was now, around gender differences generally across our assessments, not just behaviour, but looking at other areas as well and the impact of that. So yes, that there are published things that we have on these topics that might be interesting for people to have a look at.
Thank you very much indeed, Emily. And I'm coming to Baljit now. I'm a great lover of having 3 things to do, 3 things to achieve. From your point of view, Baljit, if you said to the audience here today, these are the top 3, what are the interventions that could help reduce bias? What would they be?
Okay, so narrowing them down to three, I think first and foremost, it's got to be this awareness issue. People don't know what they don't know, or people come at things from their lived experience, which is natural, it's given. So unless we have that education within the organization, those conversations, that awareness raising, which could be through a multiple number of ways. So it could be some self-education, I go and look at a particular documentary, or I read a particular book that, will enlighten me. Or it could be through the organization in terms of information that's available, or, the training that's available. But that awareness raising is absolutely fundamental. Unconscious bias training has had a bit of a backlash, and there's lots going on at this moment in time, which the audience will be fully familiar with, in terms of it doesn't work, it's ineffective. And I think that's just a myth that has grown legs over the last few weeks and months. It is effective, one, obviously, if it's done in the right way, in that it is well designed, and it is convincing in its delivery. So absolutely, we need to think about how it's actually delivered. But it's naive to think that that on its own will be an instant fix. So this has got to be part of a wider D&I program, looking at, the leadership and the structures and the policies and, the culture of an organization. So it fits perfectly well within that. So that whole awareness raising is absolutely fundamental. And I think the other thing that people can do, which I think is really, really powerful, is just exposing themselves to people that are different to you, or situations that are different to you, because it's amazing what that can do in terms of perspective taking. Because a big thing in here in terms of building that empathy and understanding different people's lived experience and where people might be coming from when they make a contribution, whatever that contribution looks like. It's this whole issue about, can I understand somebody's perspective? Am I open and willing and receptive to actually seeing the world from somebody else's viewpoint? So that can only happen when you're exposed to that difference. And again, that could come in the shape of films and, books and, meeting different people. So how are we almost, I would actually say, be inauthentic. How are we almost being inauthentic in that way? Because if we're authentic and we are true to our values, we will always gravitate to people that are like us or are similar to us. So it's almost sort of inverting that and saying at times, be inauthentic, gravitate to people that you ordinarily would not be attracted to, because that's where the learning will happen and that perspective taking and that empathy development will happen. So that's the second thing. And the third thing I think is quite key in terms of these processes and policies we have in an organization, our systems, building in those nudges. So we've already heard about anonymous CVs. All of those things do matter. We do see that they have made a change in organizations. More people have been getting through to the next stage of the recruitment process. There's plenty of evidence out there. But obviously your point, Susie, in that it can still fall down because then the mindset, individual mindset interrupts the flow. But absolutely thinking about where in your policies and procedures do you build in those nudges that almost direct people in terms of their behaviors to where you want the organization to be. So that's three things. I could go on, but that's three things.
No, I think that those are three things. They're great things. And I saw a video recently, and it had a room full of people, and it put them in their stereotypical groups of in terms of age, abilities, and so on and so forth. And then it said the presenter said, "Could you, if you were the clown in the class, please step forward." And of course, people from all of the different groups stepped forward. So you had a very different mix of people when you put a different label or role on them. Those who were parents, grandparents, those who worked, and things of that nature. And I know we've got an organisation on here today who put Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Effective Leadership at the core of their organisation, and that's all about understanding or seeking to understand from a different perspective rather than staying in our own comfort zone. We push ourselves just that little bit harder to understand, where sometimes it's something that we just have no previous experience of.
Okay, Susie, can I just quickly just say, when we talk about difference, it's also thinking about similarity, because it's only when we have that contact with other people, we realize how much, like you said, parents, children, whatever it might be, whatever that connection is. And I think that's quite key. This is not about having contacts. This is about building connections. The two are very different.
Yes, Absolutely, absolutely there. So I'm going to, I'm just conscious of time. We've got four minutes to go. And just to say to the panelists, we will be, I'm sorry, to the panelists, the attendees, we will be sending you a follow-up on this. And all of our people here have gifted information, time to help move this forward. And I wanted to ask you, Joel, following on from all of we've said, you've mentioned about the commercializing of diversity and its importance. Could you just tell us a little bit more about that? Because I often think that looking at the bottom line is often the most compelling reason.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we mentioned that slightly earlier in terms of that balance between people and output, I suppose, from an EDI perspective. But I think the way I would look at it is that traditionally, I would say it's almost been taboo to talk about the importance of EDI and the bottom line in a normal sense. But I think what has been great to see is that people now recognize the importance of that commercial output and that commerciality of diversity and its wider impact in terms of social value, its wider impact in terms of social impact, and its commercial value for the organization to help them to reinvest back into initiatives which actually support the development of diversity and inclusion. And I think specifically around recruitment, sorry to cut you, Susie, just specifically around recruitment itself, what I've also seen is that once organizations get it from that perspective of the commercial side, when they then invest into CSR activities for their staff, as an example, they can then now start to commercialize the social value. So if I'm paying a member of staff, 10, 15 pounds an hour, what have you, and they're also doing 20 hours of volunteering as part of their CSR, I can now calculate that time being spent on activity with that commercial value of their salary, give that a number. But if I'm doing that at scale, and I work in an arena where I have procured contracts, for example, where they're asking for social value contributions, whether it's 10%, 15%, I can use social value in a much more effective manner, in a commercialized manner, to support the growth of the business through that contracting. But I need to understand the motivations and the drivers of all my people, and therefore the diversity aspect. So you can start to begin to see a chain of where that could be utilized in that particular way. And that's just one example.
No, that's absolutely super. And I'm just so disappointed we've run out of time. I just wanted to highlight one of our attendees here who did a great initiative of introducing a cookbook so that everybody contributed, and it showed the differences, and also about valuing the different cultures that they had within the workplace. Emily, Balgit, Joel, I can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom, your experience and your expertise with everybody here today. We will be sending information out, and there will be a roundtable follow-up, and I think that we could fill it lots of times over. So safe COVID journey to all of you that attended today. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and look forward to seeing you in the future. Goodbye, guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.